You'll also find in business cases that there are some standard sections. No two business cases will be absolutely identical, but as I said earlier, the public sector, the civil service in particular, does like having things to a standard template. So it's not unusual for you to see 5 main sections within a business case. The more complex cases, yes, you will see 10, 15 sections. For a simple business case, they may be collapsed into 2 or 3 paragraphs. But you will be able to track these 5 sections, whatever the paragraph headings say. They are a summary of your case. In other words, in a nutshell, can you explain the idea, the justification, the costs, the benefits, and how you're going to deliver it in a few short paragraphs. Any of you viewers that have been to board meetings will have seen papers presented which have something called an executive summary, and that's what a summary of a business case is. Somewhat flippantly, it's for the people that can't be bothered to read the whole document. Can they get an idea in 2 or 3 paragraphs or 2 or 3 pages exactly what you are asking for? The second section is known in the jargon as the strategic case. And this is where you need to show how your proposal or idea fits in with the other strategies and policies and priorities of the organisation you are approaching for a decision. So let's take a health board here in Wales. There will be plenty of other strategies, public health strategies, reconfiguration strategies, clinical trial strategies that they have already going on. So they want to know how your case fits in. Does it align itself with something they're already doing? Does it challenge or contradict with something they're already doing? How will it add value to what the organisation is already doing? The strategic case will also need to cover the timing. Where will this fit into their planning cycle? Will you make sure that if the money is allocated in April, that you are doing your planning in November, December, January, and not writing a business case in May, which you expect to get funded there and then? So that's the strategic case, and on screen you'll see an example of what a strategic paragraph or 2 might look like for a typical business case. The third section, so far we've covered the summary and the strategic case. The third section will be the economic case. In other words, this is where you start to lay out in detail the various options that you have considered in how you're going to move this idea forward. And it's at this point that a tool called option appraisal comes into play. Later on in the presentation, I'll give you a slide which shows what an option appraisal template looks like. But for the moment, you just need to know that the economic case you write has to show how the various options stack up. If you're going to want a proposal which says we need to spend money on 3 locum doctors, well, what other alternatives did you look at? And you need to compare and contrast those options, and that's where the economic case comes in. You also need, and this is regularly forgotten by people who don't do business cases for a living, you need to include what I call the do nothing option. In other words, what would be the implications if we didn't do anything? I've seen business cases fail not because the ideas that they put forward were not brilliant. The numbers stacked up, but what they failed to do was to articulate the damage that would be done if nothing were done. And because of that, the decision-making body simply turned around and said, you've not made the case for change. Your ideas are good, but why should we be changing anything at all? So you must always include the do nothing option. The fourth section is what we call the financial case. This is where you start to get into the detail of the numbers. How much will your proposal cost? Is it new money? Is it recycled money? Is it a proposal which requires money now which will deliver savings later? in which case you need what is the public sector equivalent of a bridging loan. You need the money up front, which you will agree to pay back through savings. Is it a redistribution of money from another part of the service, perhaps where a clinical service or an administrative service is being scaled back, and you can use those savings in order to fund your new project? You need to tell them when you want the money. Again, make sure you fit in with the budgeting cycle of the organisation you're going to. And the final section of the 5 sections that I think you will spot in most business cases is the achievability case. This is where you persuade the decision-making organisation that you can actually deliver what needs doing if they were to say yes. So typically this is where you might put in things about the project management approach. Who's going to run the project? Again, is it new staff, in which case you have to spend money on them, or is it asking staff that are already employed by you to take on that responsibility? What are their credentials for doing this? What's their experience of managing projects? How long will the project take? When will you require the money at stages through the project? What's the risks of the project going wrong, and how will you manage those risks? So in other words, in the achievability case, the organisation needs reassurance that if it's by your idea and they say yes, that there's a reasonable chance of it being delivered on time, on budget, with the outcomes that you promised. And being slightly topical, you may be aware that the NHS regularly runs into problems with its major IT projects, many of which run over time and over budget, and the politicians eventually pull the plug on them. And that to me is evidence that the idea is brilliant, it's been well costed. The trouble is, it's not been project managed successfully and professionally. So those are the 5 sections: a summary of your case, the strategic case for change, the economic case where you look at all the options and score and compare and contrast those options, the financial case, and finally the achievability case. Can you actually deliver what you promised? So what I would advise you to do after you've watched and listened to this is just go on Google and have a look at a few business cases. Not to copy them, but just to see whether you can spot those 5 themes. The simple ones will probably use those headings. The more complex ones will come up with their own headings, but you should by now be able to spot those 5 themes.